The Boy Who Never Came Home. On fathers, empires, dead friends, and the world that was never far enough. By Elias Winter. August 17th, 2026. Read by an automated voice. There is still Arabia. They tell me this as though I have forgotten. The ships are waiting on the Euphrates. The engineers have measured the water. Men have counted horses, grain, timber, sails. Somewhere beyond these walls, there are scribes making lists of things I will need for countries I have not yet conquered. I am 32 years old. My body is burning. Babylon breathes outside the chamber. I can hear water sometimes. Voices. Sandals on stone. Men whispering because kings are not supposed to hear men whisper. They think I am dying. Perhaps I am. I have been wounded before. Spears, arrows, stones, blades. My body contains a geography of men who tried to stop me. None of them did. Now there is something inside me without a face. I cannot charge it. I cannot surround it. I cannot negotiate with it. I cannot ask where its cavalry is positioned. I lie beneath linen in Babylon, in the country that once belonged to the kings I was raised to hate, and think of a place I have not seen since I was 21. Macedonia. The word feels smaller than I remember. Sometimes, in the fever, I see rain. Not the rains of India, which came like the sky breaking open. Macedonian rain, cold rain, mud beneath a horse, my mother's hands, my father's voice. And I find myself wondering something that no general ever asked me and no philosopher prepared me to answer. When did I stop going home? The horse was not wild. That was the first thing I understood. The men said he was vicious, impossible, a waste of money. He reared and twisted beneath their hands, and each man who approached him became another proof that the animal could not be mastered. I watched. He turned. The shadow moved. He frightened himself. I was a boy, but I knew something the men did not know. Fear often looks like defiance when you are standing on the wrong side of it. I took his reins and turned him toward the sun. The shadow disappeared behind him. His body changed beneath my hand. I climbed onto him. For a few breaths, there was only horse beneath me and sky above me. And then the earth began moving very fast. I remember laughter. I remember shouting. And I remember my father, Philip. He was watching. There are victories I cannot remember clearly. Men tell me where I stood at Gaugamela. They tell me which formations moved, which units broke, which horsemen followed me through the gap. But I remember my father's face that day. Pride is a strange thing to see in the face of the man whose pride you fear. He told me Macedonia was too small for me. Find yourself a kingdom worthy of you, he said, or something close enough that men have repeated it ever since. They think it was a blessing. Perhaps it was. But blessings are dangerous things to give children. A child does not know when to stop obeying them. Bucephalus carried me away from that field. He would carry me farther than either of us could have understood. Across Asia, across mountains, across kingdoms whose names had not yet entered my mouth. I thought I had learned how to master fear by turning it toward the light. It took me many years to understand that men also run from shadows. Some of us run so far that we call it conquest. My father kept winning. That was the problem. Messengers came to Pella carrying news of another city, another army, another agreement bent into obedience by Philip's patience or Philip's violence. The adults celebrated. I counted. Each victory seemed to remove something from the world. What would remain for me? There are boys who wish their father's immortality. I wanted mine to live forever and feared that if he did, there would be nothing left beneath the sun that did not already carry his fingerprints. I loved him. That is the part men simplify. They want fathers and sons to be either devotion or hatred because history is easier when everyone contains only one emotion at a time. I loved him because he was enormous. I resented him because he was enormous. He had lost an eye and still saw farther than most men. He had taken Macedonia, a country Greeks mocked, and turned it into the instrument by which Greece itself could be commanded. He built the army I would inherit. He imagined Asia before I crossed into it. Even Persia was, at first, my father's idea. And so I began competing with a man who had not asked me to compete with him in every breath. When he remarried, when the court shifted, when wine made insults possible that daylight might have prevented, I sometimes hated him with the peculiar hatred only sons can feel. Hatred made almost entirely from love and terror. Then he died, not in battle, not before Troy, not beneath the walls of some impossible city. At a celebration, a blade, blood, confusion, a king falling where everyone could see him fall. I was 20. That morning I had a father. Soon after, I had a kingdom. People speak of succession as though a crown travels cleanly from one skull to another. It does not. A crown passes through blood. Men tested me immediately. They had known me as the prince who spoke too quickly, rode too hard, argued too freely. Now they had to decide whether they would kneel. I gave them reasons. I became king quickly because hesitation is a luxury granted to men who are not surrounded by people calculating whether they can survive your death. But there was something no coronation solved. Philip was gone before I could become greater than Philip. He never saw Issus. He never saw Gaugamela. He never saw Babylon open its gates. He never saw me enter Susa. He never stood beside me beneath the columns of Persepolis. Everything I did afterward became, in some secret chamber of myself, a message sent to a dead man. Look what I did. Look how far I came. Look what your son became. But the dead are terrible fathers. They never answer. I had heard of Persia before I knew what empire meant. Darius, Xerxes, Marathon, Thermopylae, Athens burning, men standing in narrow places against armies larger than stories could hold. Persia entered my childhood not as geography, but as scale. It was what lay beyond Greece. The great eastern thing. The throne from which kings commanded peoples whose languages they could not speak. At court I saw Persians too. Not the Persians of Greek memory. Men, nobles, exiles. Men who understood roads and satrapies and the habits of kings. When Persian envoys came, I wanted to know distances. Which road led where? How long between cities? What sort of man was their king? Children are supposed to ask about golden cups. I wanted to know how the machine worked. Then Aristotle came. He gave names to distinctions Greeks already carried in their bones. Greek and barbarian. Freedom and servitude. Reason and appetite. The proper order of men. He taught me to classify the world. Homer taught me to enter it. Achilles mattered more. I slept with him near me in words. A young man who crossed the sea into Asia knowing that glory and death were perhaps the same road viewed from opposite ends. When I crossed the Hellespont, I knew exactly which story I was entering. I went to Troy. I honored Achilles. I touched the soil of Asia as though the earth itself had been waiting. I was 21 years old. Behind me was Macedonia. Before me was everything I had been told was too large. Do you know what it feels like to stand at the beginning of your own myth? It feels nothing like myth. The wind moves. Horses shit. Men complain about equipment. Someone is hungry. Someone has forgotten something. The sea looks like water. And yet beneath all of it is the knowledge that you can still turn around. There is one final moment before every great act when the life you already possess remains available. Then you move. I moved. For 11 years, I did not stop. At first Darius frightened me. I should say that. Kings are allowed fear. They merely hire poets to rename it afterward. Persia was still immense. I had won battles, but winning a battle against an empire is not the same as owning the morning after it. At Issus, I saw what happened when scale became panic. The great king's army broke. Darius fled. His family remained. His mother, his wife, his children. There is something strange about entering the tent of the man you have spent years imagining and finding the people who love him. Suddenly the enemy has daughters. Suddenly the great king is also someone's son. I treated them as royalty. Men praised me for mercy. Perhaps there was mercy in it. Perhaps I already understood that a man who intends to inherit a throne should not humiliate the throne's family. We are never only one motive. Then came Gaugamela. People will tell you that was when I conquered Persia. It was not. It was when I began to believe the world might have made an exception for me. That is more dangerous. Again I rode toward the place where death should have been thickest. Again the line opened. Again Darius fled. Again I survived. There comes a point when repeated survival stops feeling accidental. A man begins to wonder whether the gods have mistaken him for something more than a man. Babylon received me. Susa opened. Treasures accumulated beyond counting. The wealth of generations became inventory beneath my name. And still Darius ran. So I chased him. Across the empire. Past cities. Past exhausted men. Past the point at which victory should have satisfied me. I needed him alive. I did not understand this at the time. I thought I needed the king defeated. What I needed was the king to see me. Philip was dead. Darius remained. There was still one man whose acknowledgement could make the thing complete. I found him too late. His own men had turned against him. When we reached him, the great king of Persia was lying in his blood. No final battle, no surrender. No crown placed into my hands, no eyes meeting mine. A corpse. I covered him. I sent him to be buried as a king. Then I hunted the men who killed him. The Greeks thought I had defeated Persia. The Persians saw something different. The foreign invader was avenging Darius. The throne had changed hands. I did not realize it yet. But the king I had chased had stopped being my enemy before his body was cold. He had become my predecessor. Another dead man whose place I could occupy, but whose recognition I could never possess. Persepolis was beautiful. I wish it had not been. Hatred is easier when the thing you hate is ugly. We entered Persis carrying old stories. Xerxes had crossed into Greece. Athens had burned. Temples had burned. Generations of Greeks had learned the names of Persian kings beside the names of their own dead. And now I stood inside their house. Not a house. A statement carved into stone. Stairways filled with nations, Medes, Elamites, Egyptians, Babylonians, Lydians. Men from lands I had not yet seen bringing gifts toward a king who stood at the center without needing to shout. That was what Persepolis understood. Power does not always have to move. Sometimes power stands still and makes the world approach it. I walked through halls built by Darius and Xerxes and felt something I did not have language for. We had conquered them, but they had known how to imagine empire. There is a difference. Then came the fire. Men will argue forever about whether I planned it. Let them. Wine was there. Anger was there. Athens was there. Xerxes was there. Men who had crossed Asia with me were there. A woman called for vengeance and found a room full of conquerors eager to believe destruction could become justice if enough people shouted. I took a torch. That is what matters. Flames climbed the palace of the kings I had defeated. Wood cracked. Smoke filled the halls. The ceiling glowed. For a moment, vengeance was simple. Xerxes burned Greece. Alexander burned Xerxes, accounts balanced, history corrected. But fire has no memory. It does not know which king ordered which invasion. It consumes what you give it. I watched Persia burn and felt triumph becoming something else before the embers cooled, because I had already begun wanting what I was destroying, not their defeat, their inheritance, the roads, the satrapies, the great cities, the ability to hold Egyptians and Babylonians and Persians and Greeks inside a single political imagination. I had been raised to conquer Persia. No one told me Persia might conquer my idea of what a king could be. Near Persepolis stood Pasargadae, Cyrus, the founder. Greeks spoke differently of Cyrus than of Xerxes. Even our writers could not quite make him small. He had taken a provincial kingdom and built a world. I saw his tomb, simple compared with the palaces of his descendants, a dead king beneath stone. I did not yet understand him. I was still young enough to think the important thing about Cyrus was what he had conquered. Years later, I would return and understand that the important thing was what remained. That day, though, Persepolis burned. I burned the house I wanted to inherit. Perhaps that was the moment I stopped being the man who had come to avenge Greece. Perhaps I had to destroy Persia once before I could admit that I wanted to become its king. Cletus had saved me. At the Granicus, before Asia had learned my name properly, a Persian blade came close enough to make all the history after it almost impossible. Clytus struck first. I lived. That should have been enough between us. But men do not remain frozen at the moment they save one another. Years passed. I changed. He noticed. Old Macedonians noticed everything. They had known Philip. They remembered the court before victory made every gesture sacred. They remembered me young. That became increasingly difficult for me. At the banquet, there was wine. There was always wine when men needed permission to say what daylight disciplined them against saying. Clytus spoke of Philip, of the old Macedonians, of the men whose blood had made my victories possible. He mocked what I was becoming. Persian clothes, Persian customs, men bowing, gods entering my genealogy. He spoke to me not as Asia spoke to me, not as conquered men spoke. He spoke as someone who remembered. I became angry, then more than angry. The room narrowed, words turned into wounds, and I killed him. There are moments when a man acts faster than the self who will have to remember the action. Then time resumes. Clytus was dead. The man who had saved my life had died by my hand. What kingdom compensates for that? What city can be founded on that grave? I had killed enemies without counting them. This was different. An enemy wants you dead. Clytus wanted me to remember who I had been. Perhaps that was why his words reached so deeply. I had become powerful enough that fewer people could tell me the truth. Then I became powerful enough to kill one who did. Men restrained me. Men comforted me. Philosophers found arguments. Priests found meanings. Kings are surrounded by people whose livelihood depends upon converting their disasters into destiny. But no explanation raised Clytus. I had crossed into Asia believing greatness meant conquering men who opposed me. Somewhere along the way, I learned a darker power. I could destroy a man simply because he refused to worship the person I had become. There are men you kill because they hate you. There are men you kill because they remember you. The second kind do not leave. India did not look like the end of the world. That offended me. There was another river. There was always another river. We had crossed mountains men said armies could not cross. We had fought tribes who had never heard of Macedonia. We had moved farther from Pella than any Macedonian army had ever imagined moving. Still, the earth continued. I began to hate horizons because they lied. Every horizon promises an edge. reach it, and there is more land. At the Malian town, I climbed too quickly. My men were slow behind me. I went over the wall. Of course I did. I had spent years learning the wrong lesson from survival. An arrow entered my chest. For a moment, the world became breath. Not empire, not destiny. Breath. Air would not come correctly. Blood came. Men thought I would die. Perhaps I thought it too. What an absurd way for the son of Zeus to end. Not beneath Darius's sword. Not fighting some king whose name poets would remember. An arrow from a man who may never have known whom he struck. I survived. Again. Then Bucephalus died. There are griefs too private for empire. He had carried the boy my father watched. He had carried the king across Asia. When I touched him near the end, I was touching Macedonia. I named a city for him because kings name cities when they cannot keep what they love alive. Then my men refused me. At the Hyphasis, I told them we would continue east. There were more kingdoms, more rivers, more world. They said no. Not the Persians, not the Indians, my Macedonians, the men who had crossed everything with me. They wanted home. I spoke. They remained silent. I withdrew. I waited. They still wanted home. Do you understand what that did to me? I had spent my life proving that obstacles were merely things insufficiently commanded. Now the obstacle loved me. The obstacle had scars beside mine. The obstacle had followed me for years, and it said, enough. They spoke of wives, children, parents, fields, Macedonia, home. I listened and felt something stranger than anger. I could understand every word individually. Together they formed a language I no longer spoke. Home. Why did they want it so badly? Why did I not? That frightened me more than their refusal. I turned back because even Alexander cannot march an army made entirely of himself. The return was terrible. Desert. Thirst. Men dying beneath a sun no courage could intimidate. The world had finally begun answering us. Not with an army, with bodies, with distance, with exhaustion, with the simple truth that flesh does not care what stories are told about it. When I returned to Pasargadae, Cyrus had been robbed. The tomb had been opened. Things were missing. The dead king's body had been disturbed. I was furious. I questioned the guardians. I ordered repairs. Put him back. Restore what can be restored. Seal the entrance. Protect him. Protect Cyrus. It sounds ridiculous now. Cyrus had conquered kingdoms before my grandfather was born. He had made Persia into the thing I crossed Asia to defeat. For 2 centuries, men called his descendants great kings, and thieves had entered his tomb. Perhaps they were poor. Perhaps they were greedy. Perhaps they did not care whose bones lay inside. That was the insult, not hatred, indifference. The world had forgotten to be impressed. I stood before Cyrus and finally understood what I had failed to understand when I first came through Persis. He had won. He had actually won, more completely than almost any man who had lived before him. And still his corpse required protection from ordinary hands. What had all that power purchased? Time? No. A longer argument with oblivion. That was all. There were words associated with his grave. Men repeat them differently, as men always do when the dead can no longer correct them. I am Cyrus. I ruled Asia. Do not begrudge me this monument. Something like that. I had called myself King of Asia. Now another King of Asia lay beneath me, asking future strangers not to disturb a few stones. I thought of Persepolis, of Darius, of Philip, of Achilles, all the men I had built myself against. Dead. Cyrus had no guard against time. Neither would I. I could order the tombs sealed. I could execute thieves. I could station soldiers, but I could not command the century after my death. For the first time, conquest appeared to me in its true size. A man walks across the earth saying, "Mine, mine, mine." Then the earth closes over him. Hephaestion died in Ecbatana. There should be more to say. I have commanded men in languages I barely understood. I have spoken before armies waiting to decide whether to follow me into death. I have sent messages across continents. I have argued with philosophers. I have dictated laws. I have named cities. But here language becomes small. Hephaestion died. He had known me before Asia. That is what people do not understand. They ask what he was to me. Friend, companion, general, beloved. They want the correct word because people believe naming a thing gives them possession of it. He was Hephaestion. He knew which parts of me were performance. He knew when I was afraid. He knew the difference between Alexander and the king. There were thousands of men who loved Alexander because Alexander had made them rich. Thousands who feared me. Thousands who praised me. Thousands who called me divine because divinity is safer when the god can promote you. Hephaestion remembered the boy. I could not impress him with Asia. He had been there. He had watched me bleed. He had smelled the camps. He knew victory smelled mostly of horses, sweat, metal, and dead men. When other people looked at me, I increasingly saw their idea of me looking back. With him, I did not have to meet the idea first. Then he became ill. I had fought sickness before. Men recover, physicians act, orders are given, things happen. That was how the world worked. I left, I returned. He was dead. No, I rejected the sentence. Hephaestion was dead. No, bring the physician, punish someone, ask the oracle, cut the hair, stop the music, build something, burn something, send messengers, ask whether he can be honored as a hero, ask whether the gods will receive him, ask again. Kings become insane around death because obedience has trained us badly. All our lives we speak and things move. A gate opens, a man kneels, an army turns, a city surrenders. Then we stand before one silent body and discover what command has concealed from us. No one was listening. I wanted him back. That was the entire policy. Everything else was administration. People say I mourned excessively. What is the correct quantity? Tell me. How many days should a man mourn the witness to his life? How many horses? How much hair? How much fire? How large a funeral before the dead become embarrassed and return? I had crossed every river they put before me. There was no river back to him. That was the obscenity. I could travel from Macedonia to India. I could send orders from Egypt to Bactria. I could measure roads from Susa to Sardis. But the distance between the living and the dead was smaller than the width of his closed eyes and larger than my empire. After Hephaestion, people still called me king. That seemed almost funny. King of what? Not this. Not the one country that mattered. I began another campaign in my head because movement was the only prayer I knew. Arabia, ships, coasts, ports, more geography. Perhaps if I moved quickly enough, the world would begin again. But something had ended. I think I knew it. There are people who accompany you through life. And there are people whose presence makes your life continuous. When they die, the days continue, but the story does not. Hephaestion carried the bridge between the boy I had been and the thing I had become. Then the bridge disappeared. I remained on the farther shore. I try to remember Pella, not the map, the place. There's a difference. I remember wet earth. I remember horses breathing in cold air. I remember my mother's voice before it became a letter arriving from very far away. Olympias. She wrote. She warned. She accused. She loved with the violence of someone who believed love gave her the right to defend me from the entire world. I sometimes kept her at a distance because there are forms of love that occupy every room you allow them to enter. Still, she was home. Philip was home too, even when I hated him, especially then. Aristotle beneath the trees, companions before they became commanders. Bucephalus before cities carried his name. Hephaestion before either of us understood how many funerals waited ahead. I left Macedonia at 21. I kept assuming there would be time. After Asia Minor, after Darius, after Persia, after Bactria, after India, after Arabia. There is always an after when you are young. That is youth's greatest lie. My soldiers begged to go home. I resented them. Now I think perhaps they understood something I did not. They knew that a home unattended can disappear while still standing. They returned to children who had grown, parents who had aged, fields worked by other hands. Some found graves, some found strangers. But they returned. I did not. What would I have found? Would Macedonia have recognized me? Would I have recognized Macedonia? Could I have entered Pella wearing the clothes of Asia? Could I have sat in Philip's hall beneath the eyes of men who remembered me as a boy? Could I have slept? Or would the walls have been too close? Perhaps that is why I kept moving. Not because the world was too small, because the first room had become impossible to re-enter. I conquered distance until distance became the only place I knew how to live. Now when I say Macedonia, I do not know whether I mean a kingdom or a time. Perhaps home is simply the place where the dead are still alive. If so, I have not had one for many years. The fever rises. They enter the room one by one. Faces, old soldiers, younger officers, men waiting to inherit disasters they cannot yet see. Some cry, some try not to. They ask me things. I cannot always answer. Outside, Babylon continues. The river does not care. Somewhere the ships are waiting. There is still Arabia. That thought almost makes me smile. Of course there is. There is always another country, another coast, another people beyond the map. Had I lived, I would have gone. I know this. I would have found another reason: security, trade, glory, strategy, the gods. There's always a noble word available for hunger. I once believed that if I went far enough, I would reach the place where the world ended and something inside me would finally become still. Persia was not that place. India was not that place. Arabia would not have been. There was never going to be a final country. I know that now. Too late. In the fever, I see Bucephalus again. He is young. So am I. The horse turns from his shadow. I take the reins. My father is watching. He has both eyes in the dream. He is not dead. He has not conquered Greece. He has not married again. I have not crossed into Asia. Cletus is alive. Darius is alive somewhere beyond the mountains. Cyrus sleeps undisturbed. Hephaestion is waiting near the edge of the field. No one has called me great. No city bears my name. The world is still enormous because I have not yet tried to possess it. I turn the horse toward the sun. For one moment there is nowhere else to go. My father is there. My friend is there. My horse is beneath me. Macedonia is enough. And I am home.